Okay, guys, we are in Unit 2, Lesson 2. We're still talking about the environment. So, last lesson we talked about soil. This one we're talking about water and air. So, two other elements of the environment. So, water kind of goes along with soil. Whatever the soil is being affected by, the water underneath it is probably getting affected too. So, this talks about the water table, and I'm going to show you a picture of that. So, here's a good example of the water table. So you can see we've got our plants on here, and we've got our soil level. Then you've got a level of like gravel, sand, and some rock. Underneath it, you're going to have your first layer of water. So obviously, if there is chemicals or pollutants, anything getting in that sand and gravel level, they're going to seep down into the water level. This is not good because down in that water, not only is that where we get a lot of our drinking water, there are several different little insects, animals, bacteria, that good bacteria that lives in there, and we don't want it to get affected by pollutants because it's no good and it can turn threatening, harmful, or even poisonous to us or animals or those insects. So, it says, while the rain that falls on the soil might not be polluted as it soaks through the ground into the water table that I just showed you, it brings elements through it. So it's going to grab those pollutants. Water is going to grab them and pull them through to that lower level. Okay, so that's how those pollutants can get down there. That's why it's very important that we're not just wasting materials, pouring chemicals right onto the soil, on the dirt, oils, anything like that, because it's going to eventually saturate its way into the water. There are other threats to clean water. It says like our sewage systems, they're way, way better than they used to be. You know, back in the medieval times, they would just throw it out the window of their apartments and it would be down in the streets. However, those systems still leak or fail, and that waste, those chemicals have to go somewhere, and they're going to seep and find other water. So this picture right here, it's really scary if you've ever seen those, especially when we're talking about, or not talking about, when we lived through COVID. This is kind of a flashback. So this was their mask back in the day. It says the medieval times, these were masked plague doctors. So that was the mask that they wore. So imagine having to wear that as your mask compared to what we had to wear in COVID. That's pretty scary looking. Looks like a bird. But that's because they were dealing with unsanitary conditions because, like I said, they would just throw their waste into the street. Not a great system. Luckily, we advanced from that. So it says those working with animals, you also need to be concerned about the waste. While, yes, animal waste can be great fertilizer, there can be too much or it could be infected and you could lead to bacterial outbreaks, disease outbreaks. So you've got to be careful where you put it. That's why there's laws. That's why there's regulations and fines if you dump a bunch of waste or dump a bunch of stuff into water. I don't know how many hunters we have in this group, but I watched a Lone Star Law episode the other day where they got in trouble for disposing of deer in a creek. So they harvested the deer meat and they put the carcasses in the creek. Why is this bad? Because that's going to decompose and that's in the water. We may not drink that water, but several animals do. And they're going to drink that and they're going to get some disease and then it's going to impact the environment way more. So it says lack of clean water isn't only something to worry about. Waterborne diseases, like we talked about. Prevention is the best strategy for all pollutants. That's why you see the EPA, like we talked about in lesson 1, all these regulations and fines, and it's to prevent people from polluting. That's why in Texas it's such a big deal. Don't mess with Texas, don't litter, because that's going to make its way into the water, and water is very, very important. It's very vital to agriculture. Okay, so we need to dispose of our waste properly. And disposing of waste, that goes with pesticides too. So they talk about an example of a pesticide that was really widely used for insect populations, but it ended up being banned because it gave so many environmental problems. Okay, so that's why there's regulations on pesticides and insecticides. You've got a vocabulary word: ecosystems, communities of interdependent organisms in an environment. So just one little area where everything's working together. So it says insects spread disease, so farmers had good incentive not to want them on their farms. It was used to control insect populations. It managed insect populations, but the chemicals, they seeped into the soil and the water. Birds ingested the chemical, making their eggshells weaker. Few birds survived, and the bird population declined. As a result, the government banned the use of DDT in 1972, and now we use safer chemicals. So we learned from that. So just from one little thing, spraying an insect, that ended up changing the eggshells of a bird. Isn't that crazy? So what happens if we have a bird decline? Well, then we have an insect rise because birds are eating that insect. Birds are eating those plants. Birds also help us to pollinate those plants. So it just, like the butterfly effect, it all goes into a working ecosystem. So things to think of before you throw that piece of trash on the ground or dump that chemical on the ground. Who else is this going to affect? So now we're moving on to air. Air is a huge natural resource that needs to be free of pollutants for ag to thrive. So air is 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, 1% mix of other gases. If oxygen falls below 21%, we can't really live. So that's why it's really important we maintain those levels. However, things go into the air. You've heard this, you've seen this all the time with vehicles that they say a lot, construction crews, pollutants in the air such as pesticides. If you've ever seen like an airplane flying by that looks like it's spraying things, that's a crop duster. They're spraying chemicals onto the plants. All of those are ways that chemicals and pollutants can get into the air, which could lead to hazardous conditions. So air pollution can keep plants from getting enough oxygen. So it says grape yields in California have reduced by 20% due to pollution. That's crazy. So we've got to maintain our air quality. So air quality relates to the depletion of the ozone layer. Make sure you know ozone is a layer of air, forms a barrier between Earth's atmosphere, what we breathe, and the sun. It's about 15 miles above the Earth's surface. Without it, we would be directly in front of the rays of the sun and we would not live. So pollution also contributes, I'm sure you've heard of the greenhouse effect. So that's the natural process by which some of the heat from the sun is trapped near Earth's surface by a layer of atmospheric gases, and it actually is warming the planet, like a greenhouse. That's why they call it the greenhouse effect. A greenhouse is clear, gets the sunlight. Sunlight cannot go out, can't go anywhere, so it creates a warm environment. That's why we call it the greenhouse effect. It continues to talk about the greenhouse effect. Livestock also can produce some harmful gases. However, it says they are large producers of methane. That's through using the bathroom or things that happen when you use the bathroom. However, this is not near as bad as what they portray. I think it's less than 1% of methane production is produced from cows. But it says 4 categories are most destructive, reducing them is promising for global warming. So we all need to watch what we do, be aware of our carbon footprint, and know that what you do affects other organisms and other animals and plants. Okay, now we're going to talk about your activity. So activity 2 is conservation expert. So you are an expert on conservation. Remember, conservation is where you're protecting the environment, protecting natural resources. So you've been asked to speak at a conference to present your knowledge about management practices and conservation practices. So you're going to research a natural resource. So choose a natural resource. This can be water, this could be oil, this could be timber, any of the natural resources we've talked about. You can research one. So tell me the following. Basic information, where do you find it? Timber, I find it in the forest. Basic information on how it's commonly used. This is used for construction of homes and buildings. Problems associated with overuse of extraction. It can reduce habitat for wildlife. Best management practice for reducing the use of this resource. Replanting trees. Regulation on how much is harvested. Conservation practices that apply to this resource. So that's going to be planting those trees, saving forests, making sure that not all forests can be harvested. And then you're going to make a slideshow over this. So I would do 6 slides. Do a slide for each bullet. Not that difficult. Make sure that you are following this rubric. Use proper grammar and spelling because that does go into it. And then you will turn it in to the Dropbox. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to me or book office hours.